The most important evidence in this case still isn't finished, yet the legal process is already moving forward. While the public waits for final answers, a not guilty plea has been entered, court proceedings are underway, and key medical findings remain incomplete. That gap between what's known and what's still pending is where this story becomes far more complex than the headlines suggest. Because this case isn't just about charges. It's about timing, procedure, and what happens when the justice system moves before every detail is finalized. And that raises a critical question. How much can really be decided when the full picture isn't ready yet? The moment that shifted everything happened in a Los Angeles courtroom. Nick Reiner appeared for his arraignment and formally entered a not guilty plea to 2 counts of first-degree murder connected to the deaths of his parents, Rob and Michele Reiner. According to publicly available court records, the hearing itself was brief. But what prosecutors revealed added a new layer of uncertainty. They confirmed that the autopsies of both victims were still not complete. That single detail matters more than it may sound. Because in cases like this, autopsy results help clarify timelines, causes, and circumstances. Information that often shapes how evidence is interpreted later in court. Without finalized reports, investigators are still waiting on medical conclusions that could influence the direction of the case. So why would formal charges move forward when key medical findings are still pending? According to prosecutors, the charges stem from evidence already gathered during the initial investigation. Authorities allege that the couple was attacked inside their Los Angeles home during the early morning hours of December 14th, before the suspect allegedly left the residence. Nick Reiner, who is 32, was arrested later that same day after officers discovered the bodies. He has remained in custody without bail since then. In court, he appeared alongside his public defender and entered not guilty pleas to both counts. Under U.S. law, that plea does not argue the facts. It simply preserves his right to contest the charges as the case proceeds. And legally, that distinction is essential. A not guilty plea doesn't explain what happened. It only signals that the explanation is still being contested. Prosecutors have alleged that the attack involved a knife and are pursuing special circumstance charges. If convicted, sentencing outcomes could be severe. However, at this stage, the case has not yet reached trial, and all allegations remain unproven. Meanwhile, the absence of completed autopsies means some of the most technical aspects of the case are still unresolved behind the scenes. That delay doesn't stop the legal process, but it does shape how cautiously each step must be taken. And beyond the courtroom, there's another side of this story that often gets lost. Because while legal systems deal in procedures, families experience consequences immediately. The Reiner family has not spoken extensively in public, but a statement released by surviving siblings described profound loss and grief. Their words focused not on allegations or legal arguments, but on the emotional weight of losing both parents at once. It's a reminder that even as facts are debated and timelines examined, the human impact is already permanent. At this stage, investigators continue to wait for final medical findings, while attorneys prepare for what comes next. No trial date has been set, and no additional conclusions have been officially released, which leaves the case suspended in a difficult in-between moment, not resolved, not clarified, but moving forward anyway. And that's where the biggest unanswered questions begin to surface. Because once those autopsy reports are finalized, they won't just close a procedural gap, they could redefine how the entire case is understood. In cases like this, delays in autopsy completion are not unusual, especially when multiple factors must be carefully examined. According to standard procedure, medical examiners may need additional testing, consultations, or reviews before issuing final conclusions. None of that automatically signals uncertainty about the investigation itself, but it does mean that some answers take longer than the public expects. And in a high-profile case, that gap can feel even wider. So what exactly happens during that waiting period, and why does the case still move forward? From a legal standpoint, prosecutors don't need every forensic detail finalized to file charges. Charging decisions are often based on a combination of scene evidence, witness accounts, timelines, and preliminary medical findings. Autopsy results, once completed, typically become part of the broader evidentiary record rather than the starting point. That's why arraignments and plea entries can happen while certain reports remain pending. Nick Reiner's not guilty plea preserves his right to challenge the prosecution's narrative as more information becomes available. It also shifts the process into its next phase: evidence review, motions, and pretrial hearings. This is the phase where cases are quietly shaped long before a jury ever hears a word. Behind closed doors, both sides begin examining what will matter most if the case goes to trial. Prosecutors assess how forthcoming medical conclusions align with their timeline. Defense attorneys review whether any gaps, inconsistencies, or unanswered questions could become central issues later. And that's where the unfinished autopsies take on added significance. Medical findings can help clarify sequence, timing, and contributing factors. Even when they don't change the core allegations, they can influence how confidently each side presents its case. Because in court, how something is explained can matter just as much as what is being alleged. Meanwhile, Nick Reiner remains in custody without bail. That decision reflects the seriousness of the charges, not a judgment of guilt. Bail determinations are based on risk assessments, legal criteria, and statutory guidelines, not trial outcomes. At the same time, the case has drawn public attention simply due to its circumstances, but legally it now follows the same structured path as any other major criminal proceeding. Step by step, motion by motion. And that slow, methodical pace can feel uncomfortable when emotions run high. For the surviving family members, the process unfolds against a backdrop of private grief. Their public statement focused on loss rather than legal arguments, underscoring a reality that often fades behind court filings and headlines. The legal system addresses responsibility, but it doesn't resolve pain. That contrast between legal procedure and human experience is one of the quiet tensions running through this case. As of now, no final conclusions from the medical examiner have been released publicly. When they are, they'll likely be reviewed alongside all other evidence, rather than standing alone as a deciding factor, which leads to the next critical phase. What happens once everything is finally on the table? Because from that moment forward, the case stops being about what's missing and becomes about how the full story is interpreted. Once the autopsy reports are finalized, the case enters a different stage, not louder, but more defined. Those findings will be added to the evidence already gathered and reviewed by both sides. They won't exist in isolation. Instead, they'll be compared against timelines, scene documentation, and witness information already on record. According to standard legal practice, this is where narratives are refined, challenged, or reinforced. Because at this point, the case stops waiting and starts narrowing. For prosecutors, finalized medical conclusions help determine how confidently each element of the charge can be presented. For the defense, the same information is examined for inconsistencies, alternative interpretations, or unanswered questions. This is often when pretrial motions increase. Requests to limit evidence, clarify procedures, or address how certain information may be presented later. It's a quiet but decisive phase. Nick Reiner, who has pleaded not guilty, remains entitled to the presumption of innocence as the process continues. His legal team's role is not to explain events publicly, but to test the strength of the prosecution's case within the courtroom, where standards of proof are strictly defined. And that's where public perception and legal reality often move in different directions. The court handling the case, the Los Angeles Superior Court, follows a structured sequence designed to prevent conclusions from forming too early. Judges oversee procedure, not outcomes, ensuring that each step follows established legal rules. In this case, the arraignment was overseen by Judge Teresa McGonigal, marking only the beginning of a process that can take months, sometimes longer, before reaching resolution. Because major cases rarely hinge on a single moment. They're built over time. Outside the courtroom, there has been no indication of additional public filings or trial dates announced yet. That silence doesn't imply inactivity. It reflects preparation. And while the justice system moves carefully, the emotional weight on the family does not pause. Statements released by surviving relatives have centered on remembrance and loss rather than legal debate. A reminder that behind every case file is a personal reality that no verdict can undo. Right now, this case exists in a space between accusation and explanation. The legal process is advancing, medical findings are pending, and the full picture has yet to be presented in court. What ultimately matters is not how fast conclusions are drawn, but how carefully they're reached. As more information becomes available, the focus will shift from what's missing to how the complete set of facts is interpreted under the law. And the next stage of this case won't be defined by headlines, but by evidence, procedure, and time. If you want to understand what typically happens next in cases like this, from pretrial motions to how juries evaluate complex evidence, that's exactly what we'll break down in the next video. Because sometimes the most important part of the story is what happens after the initial shock fades.